Hey folks, my name is Jeremy Stretch, and this is the November Netbox community call. Thanks for joining me today. If you don't know who I am, I'm the founder and lead maintainer of the Netbox project, and I'm probably the person who's you've interacted with if you've ever opened a GitHub issue or discussion there. You see me around, I'm sure. In this month's meeting, we're going to be going through a couple community highlights and then touching on the recent version 3.4 beta release and kind of recapping some of the features. And especially digging into some of the plugins enhancements that have been made recently. And as always, we'll be wrapping up with some community Q&A. So let's go ahead and get started. First thing I wanted to highlight here was Nokia reached out recently, actually, and shared that they are working on the netbox QR code plugins. This plugin's actually been around for a while. I think it was probably one of the first open source plugins released for netbox a couple of years ago. And Nokia is interested in, sorry, if you're unfamiliar with the plugin, essentially it embeds a QR code in certain views. I think the device view, maybe some others, that represent a lot of the data about the object as defined in netbox, so that you can scan that with your phone or some other QR code reader and extract that data very easily from netbox or print labels or what have you. And Nokia's work is focused on kind of the inverse of that. So instead of rendering QR codes, scanning QR codes that have been applied to devices that have been, from the manufacturer, to automatically glean information like the manufacturer, the model number, the serial number, etc., and take that data and pre-populate a form in netbox, so that if you're going through a stack of devices, the idea is you just scan it, and then that gives you a link to add the device to netbox. So that's great. Check that out. I know that work is ongoing. There's a feature. This was initially raised, I think, in a discussion under netbox. There's also an open feature request. I think it's number 36 for the QR code plugin itself. So check out both of those. And if you're interested in contributing or just testing it out, let them know. Next thing we want to highlight, a quick hat tip to Jordan Villarreal, who picked this up from Twitter. So Nick Russo and Christopher Hart actually have a new course on, I think it's offered through Pluralsight. It focuses on network automation and has an entire module dedicated solely to netbox. So if you're interested in, it focuses primarily on Ansible. I think it's about 16 hours of content in total, with four broken out into 4 separate classes. So if you're interested in Ansible network automation, especially with the focus on netbox, check that out. I know Nick Russo, Chris Hart, I don't know him personally, but Nick I've known for a while. Produces very, very high quality content. So if his name's on it, I'm sure you'll be happy with it. And again, that's offered through Pluralsight. So I think you need to have a Pluralsight subscription. But then the course itself, I believe, is covered by that cost. Don't quote me on that, but that's my understanding. So yeah, if you're interested in Ansible and netbox, check that out for sure. Moving on to the 3.4 release, or the beta release rather. So quick reminder, we have a 4-month release cycle. So that is every 4 months we push out what we call a minor release. So that's 3.1, 3.2, 3.3, etc. Whereas 3.3.1, 3.3.2, those would be patch releases, and those come out sporadically, typically about every 2 or 3 weeks. But when we're looking at the minor release cycle, we do every 4 months we have a beta release, and then followed roughly 30 days after that by the final release. So as you can see with 3.3, we released that in July 4. We did the first beta on for 3.3 in July 14th, and then we released the 3.3.0 August 17th, so about a month later. And that's pretty typical. This time around for 3.4, we released the first beta on November 16th, and we're anticipating a final release. So that's 3.4.0 sometime around December 14th. That seems ideal. We've had a number of bug reports come in, although not very many, to be honest. We'll probably cut a second beta release maybe later this week, just to kind of wrap those up and capture that so people can do that. But typically do 2 beta releases just to make it easier for people to check out. Of course, you're always welcome to follow along with the feature branch as well. The feature branch is updated all the time, and we have our demo instance as well. So that's beta-demo.netbox.dev. You can log in there. It works exactly the same as the regular public demo, which is just demo.netbox.dev. Same credentials, admin for username and password. Get in there, check that out. And that's both of those are rebuilt nightly. So the beta demo is rebuilt from the feature branch, So that will incorporate any bug fixes or changes that have been made in the past 24 hours since it was previously rebuilt. Going through the list of features again. So we covered a lot of these, I think, in last month's call leading up to the beta release. So I'll just go through these very quickly. You can see the list on the screen there. New global search. So we've got a brand new, much more robust and efficient, and I think useful global search engine now. So it's got a single interface. It's much more capable. Check that out. Play around with it on the demo. Let us know what you think. I think you'll be pleased. It works a lot better than the legacy search did. On the data modeling side, we've implemented support for virtual device context, or VDCs. If you're unfamiliar, a VDC, or at least as we're describing it here, because there's some discussion around what exactly a VDC is. In netbox parlance, or at least what we've identified for netbox, a VDC is a logical partition of a physical device. So think about if you've got a backbone router or so, and you might have certain interfaces are dedicated to certain VDCs within that device. So it works kind of like a VRF, but more for physical partitioning. So check that out. Basically, you can define VDCs on devices, and then you can you can assign interfaces to VDCs within a device to help carve that up. So check that out, especially if you have a use case for VDCs, and let us know what you think. Next, we've got saved filters. So that's the ability to apply multiple filters. So for example, you're going to get the list of sites, and you want to find all the planned sites in a certain region that maybe have a tag on them. You can apply all those filters and then save it as a filter to be reused. So instead of trying to append all those individual parameters to the URL every time, you can just append filter equals and whatever name you've given the filter. JSON and YAML bulk imports. So this is where Netbox has historically supported CSV for bulk imports. We also now support JSON and YAML. We've supported those for device types and module types for a while now, but this has been expanded to all object types. So if you want to bulk import objects to Netbox, you now have the option of doing it in CSV, JSON, or YAML as you see fit. We've also implemented bulk updating. It says CSV-based bulk updates there. That actually works with any of the formats. I think the reason for that is the two issues were opened at different times and not implemented in conjunction. But yeah, you can. The TLDR behind this, I guess, is if you have a number of objects in there, and let's say you have new descriptions for sites or devices or whatever, but each one of them is different, but the object already exists in Netbox, you can now specify the object ID for each of the existing objects along with whatever description value. And basically the bulk import logic has been updated to say, if an ID has been specified, I'm going to go find the existing object for that ID and update whatever fields have been provided. If one has not been provided, then I'm going to create a new object. So you kind of have this converged creation and modification in one. And I believe, I hesitate to say this now on the call, but I believe you can actually create and modify objects in the same call, in the same request. I'm not 100% sure on that though, but I'm pretty sure that's supported. And if it's not, it should be supportable. And wrapping it up, we've got scheduled reports and scripts. So when you're running a custom script or a report, you can schedule that to run at a future date and time. And then we have the stage changes API, which is pretty neat, although it's currently just a programmatic API that allows you to stage changes. And the idea essentially is that you enter a context, you create a branch and you enter context, much like with, if you're familiar with Git, you do a Git checkout on a branch, you make your changes and you commit them, and it doesn't modify any of the other branches, just the one you're working on. So the idea is that you can stage changes to be reviewed and applied later on to Netbox objects. So again, that's a lot of stuff packed into 3.4. We've covered a lot of it on last month's call. If you're interested in any of those in particular, you're welcome to check out the October call, or even better, go play around with the demo and let us know what you think. All right, getting into plugins a little bit. So I haven't covered any of the plugin stuff, and we've actually got a lot of plugins improvements packed into this release. So I'm going to go over, I think there's 5 of them. There's a bit more around the edges too, but this is the meat of the plugin API improvements, I think. First up, we've got global search integration. So I mentioned the 3.4 release has a greatly improved search engine. Plugins can now dynamically register their own custom models to be included in search results. So for example, if you've got a plugin that tracks DNS records, for example, you can create a very simple search indexer that says, oh, register any DNS records for search as well, and those will be included in the results. Those appear in line with core models, so there's nothing separate about it. You search and everything. One search is going to look for both core models and plugin models, everything that's been registered. So here's a quick example of that. This is me hacking away on the Netbox BGP plugin. Just for demo purposes. I haven't actually done this in the plugin yet, although I might go back and do that if they're interested in that work. So what we've done here is take the BGP peer group model that the BGP plugin introduces and write a simple search indexer for that. All we're doing is specifying the model and then the fields that we want to cache for search and giving each one a precedence or a weight, saying name will be has a weight of 100, description has a weight of 500. What it's basically saying is names are more important than descriptions. So if I search for foo, I'm going to be more interested in results that match on the name field than the description field, right? And that's simply because the name has more significance. And so I've done that for my plugin, and now you see when I search for Akron, for example, I'm pulling up core objects as well as the BGP peer group that has Akron in its name. So that works pretty simply, I think. Next up is the ability to register top-level menus. So this is something plugin authors have been asking for a while. We've held off on it for a number of reasons, primarily because it required us to rewrite the entire the way the entire navigation menu is being rendered. But we've done that now, and a plugin can now define root level navigation menu, just as you have the organization and power menus, etc. Now your plugin can have something there that exists in the root of the navigation menu as well. It's done pretty simply, just in navigation.py, defining a menu, subclassing plugin menu, and then just exposing that as a variable named menu. And it works pretty much the same as with menu items. It's just the ability to encapsulate that. You can still define items just as you do today. We've also maintained backward compatibility. So if your plugin today just defines menu items under the shared plugins root level menu, that'll still work. You don't have to mess with it. But if you want to, you can extract that and pull that out into its own menu. And here's a quick example of doing that. So in the first stanza up there, we've got items being defined, and that today in 3.3 and prior would be defined as menu underscore items, and that would appear under the plugins menu and the navigation menu. The second stanza down here is defining a separate menu. So that's giving it a label, some groups, and an icon. Interestingly, the material design icons pack that Netbox uses does have a little router icon, which I'm sure will be used by many, many plugins. And there's a few other interesting like network-centric icons in there too, so check that out. But what you see here is we're defining a single group named foo, because I'm very unoriginal. And then we're populating items within that group, and they appear under a separate menu, as you see to the right. So pretty straightforward, basically maintaining the same structure that we've had today in 3.3 and prior, and just introducing the ability to wrap that in a custom menu. Next up is core view tabs. So this is the ability to embed a custom tab for a plugin view within a core view. So for example, if you go to look at a device in Netbox, you're going to see several tabs. The first tab is just about the device details itself. You'll see changelog and journal, like on many other objects, and then you'll see tabs for interfaces and power ports and console ports, etc. The big improvement here is that plugins now can also register tabs. There's a lot of work that actually happened behind the scenes on this to refactor everything, because we basically had to come up with a way to dynamically register those tabs now to be able to support plugins. But that's done. And the two key pieces here are the new utility, it's called Register Model View, to dynamically register a view for specific models, and as well as the new View Tab class, which is basically just a way to represent and inform the rendering of a specific tab for a view. So why might you want to do this? One example is, if you've got, let's say you've got a bunch of BGP attributes that are applicable to a device, for example, you can register a BGP tab under the device view, and that would clicking that tab then takes you to a view provided by your plugin. Here's a quick example of that. So on the left here, we've got our decorator here. So register model view. It's basically saying I'm going to register this view class that exists that I'm wrapping. For the site model, I'm going to give it the URL name prefix lists. And the actual URL path is going to be prefix -lists. That's going to happen under the site detail view. And then the view itself is pretty self-explanatory, which is object list view. And now we're adding a tab. So we're associating a view tab instance with this view so that whenever it has to be embedded, or when it's being, kind of hard to describe, I guess, without going into a whole lot of unnecessary detail. But basically, the tab is being associated with the view whenever it's being rendered for an associated model. So when we invoke this tab, we're giving it a label. That's the text string that you see. We're giving it an optional badge, and the badge can take a function or callable that will return a count, which is pretty neat. So, for example, if you wanted to show the number of, I think in this example, we're showing the number of prefix lists associated with the site, which I'm just making up. It's not actually something that exists, but just to come up with a simple example that doesn't require a whole lot of background knowledge. The tab is getting past the object when it's being rendered, and we can go call related count related objects from that object. Hopefully that makes sense. I know I'm not doing the best job of explaining this right now, but look at the code. Hopefully the code makes more sense than I am. And on the right there, you see the tab as being rendered. Again, so we're saying there's 4 prefix lists that exist for this site. We also have the option of hiding tabs based on permissions assigned to the user, or if the badge is empty. For example, when you go to the device view, you don't see all 7 or 9 tabs or however many for all the different component types. You only see the tabs that are, you only see tabs for the types of objects which exist on that device. So for example, you won't see the console ports tab unless there's at least one console port defined for that device. Well, we have the same option here with tabs. You can, I think by default, they're hidden if the badge count is 0. Or maybe they're shown, but either way, you can toggle that. So you got a lot of flexibility there. I'm interested to see what people do with this over time. Next up, list view buttons. So we've basically added a 5th method to the plugin template extension class. So the 4 that exist today are for embedding custom content on object views. So this is HTML content. So you basically have the options of left side of the page, right side of the page, full page, or top right corner for actions. And this is a 5th one that now embeds content in an object list view. So the 4 existing ones are for detail views, like if you're going to look at a specific site. The new list of buttons method would embed content in the top right corner of the site list. Typically, that's going to be for buttons, but in theory, you could put anything else up there as well. And finally, plugins can now register and install additional Django apps. So this is something we've kind of debated for a while because of the potential problems that it can introduce. But I think we've got a pretty nice. Oh, sorry, I'm going to say also thank you to fellow maintainer Art Hansen for the list view buttons work. And thanks to Jonathan Senecal for this piece here. The idea here is a plugin can specify Django apps under its plugin config and specify a list of apps to be installed. Note that this is a separate concern from requirements, right? So if you're defining a plugin to be packaged and you have like requirements, that text in there, you can pull in any Python package, that's fine, and you'll still need to do that. So for example, if there's a Django app called, cool app or whatever, you'll still need that in requirements because that's actually telling the system to install it in the Python environment. This pertains to the actual installation or registration of an app within Django itself, so the Django framework. If you're building a Django app natively, you go in settings.py and you'll define installed apps. This is basically adding these required apps to that list through Netbox. It's also possible, because of the way we're doing this, to force the registration of individual apps before or after the plugin itself. It's kind of a niche use case, but there are kind of strange instances where sometimes you'll need to register one app before another. So just something to keep in mind. So that's a lot of new stuff, as you can see, coming to the the plugins API for 3.4. So I'm happy we're able to get all of that out in this release. A quick reminder: so we do have our free plugins development tutorial that's available on GitHub. That will be updated here the next couple of weeks to to introduce or cover the new 3.4 features as well in conjunction with the final release. And you can find that in the Netbox community organization on GitHub, netbox-plugin-tutorial. Okay, we'll wrap up with a couple questions from the community now. First one we have is from, I'm sorry, I don't know how to pronounce that. I'm not going to try because I know I'm going to butcher it. Is the napalm, is removing napalm still on the roadmap, and will it be migrated to a plugin? Yes and yes. So Netbox, since its very early days, has supported an integration with napalm, which existed primarily as like kind of a convenience / proof of concept from its very early days before it really found its footing as a source of truth. What we found is it's been kind of limiting in how it's used, and it's not really given the attention it probably needs to turn it into something a little bit more useful. So I recently opened feature request number 10520 to split that out into a separate plugin. And I think we're going to do that probably for Netbox version 3.5. It'll be a little bit easier now with some of the improvements that we've made to the plugins API. It makes it a little bit more feasible. So we're going to retain the functionality, much like what we did with secrets, where we will split out the existing code, take that out of core, and just repackage that as a Netbox plugin, so that if it's something that you want to use, you can just install that plugin and continue using it. But yeah, we're moving it out of core primarily to get it a little bit more attention as kind of its own entity, and also to help remove some of the challenges around napalm integration in general from the core code base concerns. There have been a number of issues opened recently about weird things like how do you actually validate certain interface names and different formats and things like that. We're getting to the very nitty gritty of implementation details that kind of distract a lot from core or just kind of get ignored because there's so much else going on in the Netbox core. So I'm looking forward to doing that. Next up, are there any plans to support Jinja 2 for plugins instead of Django templates? Right. So when you're creating a Netbox plugin today, Netbox uses the Django templating language, which looks a lot like Jinja 2, but it's not. That's just pure convention. They use the same kind of syntax of the curly braces and the percent signs, but they're two totally separate things. So Django templating is provided by the Django framework, as you'd expect, and it's provided natively from Django. Netbox started out with Django templating originally because there was no need to use anything else. I also don't think Jinja 2 was supported, 7 years ago when it was a thing, but or when Netbox was being created. That said, it is now. We haven't had any plans to move to Jinja 2 for a couple reasons. So one, I'm going to explain this by using a meme. So basically, when you're first starting out writing a template, you think, oh, this is great. Django templating has everything I need. And then as you do more and more and you start learning more about the framework and trying to do more and more with templates, you realize you start running into these walls where it's like, oh, I can't execute arbitrary Python code. I'm very limited to Django's strict syntax and what it allows me to do. Like I can't just call a function, specifically. I can't pass arguments to a function. I need a template tag to do that, things like that. And then people get frustrated and they say, I need to move to Jinja 2. But if you take a few steps back and realize, why those limitations are in place and why Django hasn't tried to extend it to compete with Jinja 2, you realize, oh, sometimes these safeguards are good for the specific use case, right? So remember, Django templating language was developed specifically for rendering HTML content. And when you're doing that, you generally want to have, as best practice, you want to limit the amount of logic that's actually going into the template itself. You want that business logic to be in the view, right? Owing to Django's overall kind of architecture of the MVT, right? So model, view, template, right? The T is not supposed to have much logic in there. The logic should be limited to things like, how do I, process for loops to render HTML efficiently and things like that. You don't want to be doing too much logic. So there's a lot of, it's kind of a warning sign if you're trying to do too much and you're slamming up against the walls that Django puts around their templating language. It's often a sign that you're trying to do a little too much in templates. Now that I've said that, that doesn't mean we'll never do Jinja 2. primarily because obviously we have other things in Netbox that don't render HTML primarily. Things like export templates, right? That all webhooks, things like that, that all use Jinja 2. So there's a very strong argument to be made that users should only be required to learn one templating language. And if I had to pick one, I would pick Jinja 2 because that's way more advanced. It's much more of a general purpose language than Django itself, obviously. And fun fact, originally those other models, I think like webhooks and export templates, only supported Django templating originally, and then we've at some point in the past couple of years introduced Jinja 2 support for those as well. So, and then actually deprecated support for DTL. So we might move to Jinja 2 at some point. It'll probably come down to supporting both in parallel for some time. Like we might, maybe in 3.5, we'll introduce Jinja 2 support for plugins to be able to say, to pick whichever renderer they want to use. Django itself does natively support Jinja 2 now, as I've mentioned, so it should be pretty trivial to do that. But we want to think about, what does that migration process look like? What does the experience look like for plugin developers too, and make sure that goes smoothly. So we might do that at some point in the future. Still kind of an open concern or an open question. So I'm interested to hear from the community, especially plugin developers. Let us know what you think, and we'll go from there. There was a question in the chat from Patrick. Was there a solution for the, excuse me for a second. Apologize about that. I just lost my voice. Was there a solution for the user initial set password close ticket and a way for the user to reset his password? I apologize. I don't know what issue you're referring to. I don't recall seeing anything about passwords being reset, but it's entirely possible. I'm not remembering it. There is no self-service way for a user to reset a password. It does require an administrator to go through and do that. That's for a number of reasons. Typically, those kind of workflows that you see are general kind of like public-facing apps, whereas Netbox is not. It's something we could potentially add to Netbox, although some other considerations probably have to be made around security and workflow and things like that. Typically, those work through like email delivery, so that would have to be weighed as well. Most people just go through an administrator to reset that, or worst case, using the MB shell utility to reset that locally. We also have the consideration around multi-factor authentication, how that, like obviously if you're using single sign-on, you won't be doing any of that through any password resets through Netbox natively anyway. So I don't have a better answer for that. It's probably something that might be worth raising as a feature request for additional discussion. And if there's an issue right now, I'm sorry, I don't remember it. Sorry to end on kind of a down note, but that'll pretty much wrap us up for this month. Yeah. So again, just to recap, we have 3.4 final coming out probably in the next couple weeks. In the meantime, check out the beta instance if you have the availability, and let us know what you think, because I'm interested to hear. And until next time, we'll have so we'll do another community call probably toward the end of the year, probably after the Christmas holiday, and we'll recap how the final release goes. So hope to see you all then. Take care.